15 years. That's how long I trusted Elijah Morrison with everything. My business, my future, my family's legacy. When he looked me in the eye last Tuesday and said, "It's just business, Luna," I watched him destroy everything we'd built together with the stroke of a pen. But what Elijah didn't know was that I still had access to something he thought he'd locked me out of forever. And that mistake would cost him everything. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The Morrison Chen Digital Marketing Agency started in my garage in Situ, Portland, Oregon, back in 2009. I was Luna Chen, fresh out of University of Oregon with a marketing degree and more ambition than sense. Elijah Morrison was my college roommate's older brother, a finance guy with corporate connections who could talk his way into any boardroom. We were both 25, broke, and convinced we could revolutionize how small businesses approached digital marketing. I had the creative vision and technical skills. Elijah had the business acumen and the network. On paper, we were perfect partners. The early days were exactly what you'd expect from a startup. 18-hour days fueled by energy drinks and takeout Chinese food. My garage was our headquarters, complete with folding tables from Walmart and office chairs I'd rescued from a closing internet cafe. Elijah would drive over from his downtown apartment every morning in his beat-up Honda Civic, coffee in hand, ready to make cold calls while I worked on client websites. Our first real client was Olivia's Organic Bakery, a small shop in the Pearl District run by Olivia Reeves. She was skeptical about digital marketing, but desperate enough to give 2 kids a chance. We charged her $800 to build a website and manage her social media for 3 months. I spent 2 weeks perfecting that site, learning WordPress inside and out, while Elijah negotiated with local food bloggers to review her pastries. Within 6 weeks, Olivia's weekend lines were wrapping around the block. She hired 2 new employees and expanded her hours. When she handed us our first check and said we'd saved her business, I knew we'd found our calling. Word spread through Portland's tight-knit small business community. The organic grocery store down the street wanted a website. The vintage clothing boutique needed help with Facebook ads. A local coffee roaster heard about us from Olivia and wanted to redesign their entire online presence. By our 6th month, we'd outgrown my garage. Elijah found us a small office space in Southeast Portland, just 2 rooms above a used bookstore, but it felt like the Empire State Building to us. We painted the walls ourselves, assembled IKEA furniture until midnight, and hung a handmade sign that read Morrison Chen Digital Marketing in letters I'd designed and printed at Kinko's. The name order had been Elijah's idea. Morrison Chen rolls off the tongue better than Chen Morrison, he'd said. Plus, my dad knows people in the business community here. The Morrison name opens doors. I didn't argue. We were partners, and partners made compromises. Our partnership agreement was simple. We'd drafted it ourselves using a template from LegalZoom. 50-50 ownership, shared decision-making, equal salary draws. We both signed it in that tiny office, using a plastic pen from the bank downstairs. Neither of us imagined we'd need lawyers or complex contracts. We were friends building something together. The business grew steadily. By year 2, we had 8 regular clients and revenue hitting 6 figures. I handled all the creative work: web design, content creation, social media strategy, search engine optimization. Elijah managed sales, client relationships, and finances. We hired our first employee, Noah Martinez, a recent art school graduate who could help with graphic design and free up my time for strategy. Noah was everything we needed: talented, hardworking, and grateful for the opportunity. He started part-time, but quickly proved himself indispensable. While I focused on the bigger picture, Noah handled the day-to-day creative execution. His designs were fresh and modern, perfectly complementing the strategic frameworks I developed. Elijah, meanwhile, was becoming the face of our company. He joined the Portland Business Alliance, networked at Chamber of Commerce events, and spoke on panels about digital marketing trends. He was naturally charismatic, the kind of person who could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with 5 business cards and 3 lunch meetings scheduled. I preferred staying in the background, perfecting our processes and diving deep into analytics. While Elijah schmoozed with potential clients, I was discovering new ways to maximize their return on investment. I developed proprietary systems for tracking customer behavior, created templates that could be customized for different industries, and built relationships with freelance developers who could handle overflow work. Our 3rd year brought our first major corporate client. Cascade Outdoor Gear, a regional sporting goods retailer, needed a complete digital overhaul. Their existing website looked like it hadn't been updated since 2005, and their social media presence was practically non-existent. The contract was worth $45,000, more than we'd made from any single client. Elijah had landed the account through his networking, but I did the heavy lifting. I spent 3 months rebuilding their entire online presence from scratch: custom e-commerce platform, integrated inventory management, mobile responsive design, comprehensive SEO strategy, and social media campaigns targeting outdoor enthusiasts across the Pacific Northwest. The results were immediate and dramatic. Cascade's online sales jumped 340% in the first quarter after launch. Their social media following grew from 200 to 15,000 in 6 months. The CEO, Richard Blackwood, was so impressed he recommended us to other companies in his network. That success opened doors we'd never imagined. Suddenly, we weren't just the scrappy startup above the bookstore. We were the agency that had transformed Cascade Outdoor Gear. Elijah leveraged that credibility into meetings with larger companies, while I refined our processes to handle bigger, more complex projects. We moved to a proper office building in Northwest Portland's Pearl District, 3,000 square feet with conference rooms, individual offices, and space for a growing team. I finally had a proper workspace with multiple monitors, a standing desk, and walls where I could pin up wireframes and user journey maps. By year 5, Morrison Chen Digital Marketing had 12 employees and annual revenue exceeding $2 million. We'd worked with over 100 clients, from tiny startups to mid-sized corporations. Industry publications started mentioning us in articles about Portland's growing tech scene. The Portland Business Journal named us one of the city's fastest-growing marketing agencies. Throughout this growth, our partnership seemed solid. We'd developed clear roles and rarely stepped on each other's toes. Elijah handled the external relationships and high-level strategy. I managed operations, team development, and service delivery. We met every Monday morning to review the previous week and plan ahead, and those meetings were usually efficient and productive. But looking back, I can see the subtle shifts that started around year 6. Elijah began talking more about scaling the business and maximizing shareholder value. He started attending conferences focused on business acquisition and growth strategies. He hired a personal assistant and upgraded his office furniture to a matching mahogany set that cost more than most people's cars. The changes were gradual enough that I didn't recognize them as warning signs. When Elijah suggested we bring in an outside consultant to optimize our organizational structure, it seemed reasonable. When he proposed we formalize our job descriptions and reporting relationships, I saw it as professional growth. I was so focused on delivering excellent work for our clients that I missed the bigger picture. While I was perfecting our project, management systems, and training new team members, Elijah was quietly positioning himself as the CEO and face of the company. He started introducing himself that way at networking events, even though we'd never formally assigned titles. The first real tension came during year 7, when we were negotiating a potential partnership with a larger agency in Seattle. They wanted to acquire 20% of our company in exchange for access to their enterprise clients and resources. The deal would have meant significant money for both of us, but it would have also meant external oversight and pressure to grow faster. I was hesitant. We were profitable, stable, and I loved the culture we'd built. Our employees were happy, our clients were successful, and we had complete control over our destiny. Why complicate that with outside investors who might push us to prioritize growth over quality? Elijah saw it differently. He argued that we needed to think bigger, that staying small was actually risky in a competitive market. He spent weeks creating presentations about market opportunities and competitive advantages, bringing in data about agencies that had grown through strategic partnerships versus those that had remained independent. We ultimately decided against the Seattle partnership, but the process revealed fundamental differences in our visions for the company. Elijah wanted to build an empire. I wanted to build something sustainable and meaningful. Those philosophical differences might have remained manageable if not for what happened in year 8. That's when Elijah met Sandra Hoffman at a digital marketing conference in San Francisco. Sandra was a former McKinsey consultant who'd started her own business strategy firm. She was brilliant, ambitious, and had very specific ideas about how service businesses should be structured and grown. Elijah started mentioning Sandra frequently. He'd reference insights from their conversations, quote her advice during our Monday meetings, and suggest we implement strategies she'd recommended. When he proposed hiring her firm to conduct a comprehensive business analysis, I agreed. Thinking outside perspective might be valuable. Sandra's analysis was thorough and professionally presented, but her recommendations fundamentally challenged everything we'd built. She suggested we restructure into distinct divisions with clear hierarchies, implement performance-based compensation systems, and develop more aggressive growth targets. Her report painted our collaborative, relationship-focused approach as inefficient and limiting. Most concerning were her recommendations about leadership structure. Sandra argued that partnerships with equal authority were inherently unstable, and that successful companies needed clear executive leadership. She recommended that one partner take the CEO role with ultimate decision-making authority, while the other focus on operations and delivery. Given Elijah's external relationships and business development track record, Sandra's report strongly implied he should be the CEO. The recommendation was diplomatically worded, but the message was clear. For the company to reach its potential, Elijah needed to be in charge. I pushed back during the presentation meeting. I pointed out that our current structure was working well, that our growth had been consistent and sustainable, and that our employees and clients were happy with how we operated. I argued that changing our fundamental approach could disrupt the culture and relationships that had made us successful. Elijah was diplomatic in the meeting, acknowledging my concerns while emphasizing the benefits of Sandra's recommendations. But I could see he was convinced. Over the following weeks, he continued bringing up points from her analysis, suggesting we at least pilot some of her suggestions. The pressure was subtle, but persistent. Elijah would reference successful companies that had made similar transitions, point out competitors who were growing faster than us, and question whether we were being ambitious enough. He never directly demanded changes, but the implication was clear. If we didn't evolve, we'd be left behind. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. I found myself in an impossible position. Disagreeing with every suggestion made me seem resistant to growth and change, but agreeing to changes that fundamentally altered our partnership felt like surrendering everything I'd worked to build. The Monday morning meetings that had once been collaborative planning sessions became tense negotiations about the company's direction. The situation came to a head during our 10th year, when we received an acquisition offer from Digital Dynamics, a national marketing agency based in Denver. They wanted to buy Morrison Chen outright for $12 million, keeping both of us as senior executives in their expanded Pacific Northwest division. The offer was substantial, more money than either of us had ever imagined having. But accepting it would mean giving up the independence and culture that made our work meaningful. We'd become employees of a larger corporation, subject to their processes, priorities, and profit pressures. I was strongly opposed to selling. We'd built something special, and I couldn't imagine surrendering it for money. Elijah was more interested, seeing the acquisition as validation of what we'd accomplished and an opportunity to access resources for even bigger growth. We spent 3 months analyzing the offer, consulting with lawyers and accountants, and having increasingly difficult conversations about what we wanted. The stress was affecting everything: my work quality, my relationships with employees, even my health. I was losing weight and having trouble sleeping, consumed with anxiety about the future. Ultimately, we declined the Denver offer, but the process had changed something fundamental between us. Elijah seemed frustrated that I'd blocked what he saw as a transformative opportunity. I felt betrayed that he'd seriously considered selling something we'd built together without being certain I was on board. The trust that had sustained our partnership for a decade was cracking. We were still professional in meetings and public settings, but the easy friendship that had made everything possible was gone. Elijah started making more decisions unilaterally, justifying them as necessary for efficiency. I found myself excluded from conversations I'd once been part of automatically. The final breaking point came in year 13, when Elijah announced he'd hired a new chief operating officer without consulting me. James Patterson was a former executive from a large Portland advertising agency, and his hiring was presented as a way to professionalize our operations and prepare for the next phase of growth. I was blindsided. We'd never discussed hiring a COO, and James's salary and equity package had been negotiated without my input. When I confronted Elijah, he explained that he'd been planning the hire for months and had simply forgotten to mention it during our recent meetings. It was obviously untrue. Elijah had deliberately excluded me from a major decision that affected the entire company. James's arrival would shift the balance of power, creating a management layer between me and many of the operational decisions I'd previously controlled directly. That night, I realized our partnership was over in everything but name. Elijah had decided to move forward with his vision of the company regardless of my input. The collaborative relationship we'd maintained for 13 years had become an obstacle he was actively working around. I could have confronted him directly, demanded we return to our original partnership agreement, or insisted on formal mediation. Instead, I chose to wait and watch, documenting the changes while preparing for whatever might come next. I started keeping detailed records of all company communications, financial transactions, and decision-making processes. I also quietly secured my access to critical company systems. As the original technical architect of our operations, I had administrative privileges to most of our digital infrastructure. I made sure those access credentials remained active and updated my personal copies of important files and data. Looking back, I'm grateful for that paranoia, because 2 years later, when Elijah finally made his move to cut me out completely, those preparations would be the only thing standing between me and total professional destruction. Year 14 brought changes that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. James Patterson, the new COO, wasted no time implementing his vision of corporate efficiency. Within his first month, he'd restructured our project management system, introduced weekly performance reviews, and established new protocols for client communication that required his approval. The changes weren't inherently problematic, but their implementation revealed a disturbing pattern. Every new policy somehow reduced my direct authority while expanding Elijah's oversight. Client relationships I'd managed for years were reassigned to account managers who reported to James. Technical decisions that had always been my domain now required committee approval. Noah Martinez was the first to notice what was happening. He'd been with us for 12 years and understood our company culture better than anyone. During a casual coffee break, he mentioned feeling confused about the new reporting structure. "I used to bring design questions directly to you," he said, stirring his latte nervously. Now, James wants everything filtered through him first. It's slowing down projects and making clients frustrated with our response times. I assured Noah that we were just adjusting to new processes, but privately, I was documenting every change. My personal files grew thick with emails, policy memos, and organizational charts that showed my responsibilities systematically transferred to other people. The most telling incident happened during our 15th anniversary celebration. Elijah had organized a company-wide dinner at an upscale restaurant in downtown Portland. The event was meant to celebrate our success and thank the team for their dedication. During his speech, Elijah recounted the company's history with remarkable, selective memory. He talked about the early days in my garage, but emphasized his networking efforts and business development. He mentioned our first major clients, but focused on his sales achievements rather than the technical innovations that had actually impressed them. When he described our growth over 15 years, I became an increasingly minor character in the story. By the time he reached recent years, his narrative positioned me as the operations manager who executed his strategic vision. The collaborative partnership that had built everything was rewritten as hierarchical leadership with clear lines of authority. I sat at that dinner table, surrounded by employees I'd hired and trained, listening to my own contributions minimized and reframed. Several team members glanced at me during Elijah's speech, clearly recognizing the discrepancies between his version and their lived experience of working with us. But the most shocking moment came when Elijah announced his plans for the future. He outlined an aggressive expansion strategy that would triple our workforce within 2 years, open offices in Seattle and San Francisco, and target Fortune 500 companies as primary clients. These weren't ideas we'd discussed together. This was the first time I'd heard about plans that would fundamentally transform everything we'd built. The casual way Elijah presented these major decisions made it clear that my input wasn't considered necessary or relevant. After the dinner, several employees approached me privately. They were confused about the new direction and concerned about how rapid growth might affect the collaborative culture they valued. I found myself in the awkward position of not being able to explain decisions I hadn't been involved in making. Olivia Reeves, our very first client who'd become a close friend, over the years pulled me aside as the evening ended. She'd attended the dinner as a special guest, representing the small business community that had supported our early growth. "Luna, what's happening here?" she asked directly. "That didn't sound like the company I've known for 15 years. Are you okay with all these changes?" I couldn't give her an honest answer without creating more problems, so I deflected with vague comments about growing pains and natural evolution. But Olivia's concern reflected what I was feeling. The company was becoming something unrecognizable, and I was being pushed to the margins of my own creation. The technical systems I'd built became the next battleground. James Patterson hired an external IT consulting firm to modernize our infrastructure and improve security protocols. The consultant, Michael Torres from Apex Systems Solutions, conducted a comprehensive audit of our digital operations. Torres was competent and professional, but his recommendations systematically reduced my administrative access to critical systems. He argued that security best practices required role-based permissions, with only essential personnel having full administrative rights. On paper, his suggestions made sense. In practice, they would lock me out of systems I'd designed and maintained. For over a decade, database servers, email systems, client relationship management tools, financial software, everything would require approval from James or Elijah for access or modifications. I pushed back during the presentation meeting, pointing out that I'd built most of these systems and understood their architecture better than anyone. Torres acknowledged my expertise, but insisted that personal knowledge couldn't override corporate security policies. "We're not questioning your technical skills," James explained diplomatically. "We're implementing industry standards that protect the company from potential vulnerabilities. Everyone's access will be appropriately scoped to their responsibilities." The key subtext was clear. My responsibilities were being narrowed to exclude system administration. I would become a user of infrastructure I'd created, dependent on others for access to tools I'd chosen and configured. I agreed to cooperate with the security audit while privately ensuring I maintained backup access to critical systems. Years of paranoid preparation had taught me to create redundant entry points and maintain personal copies of essential credentials. Torres's audit would close official doors, but alternative pathways would remain available if needed. The financial aspect of this systematic exclusion became apparent during our annual partner review meeting. Elijah had scheduled the session to discuss profit distributions, salary adjustments, and investment priorities for the coming year. These meetings had always been collaborative discussions where we analyzed company performance and made decisions together. This year felt different from the moment I walked into the conference room and found a formal presentation waiting for me. Elijah had prepared detailed financial projections, market analysis reports, and strategic recommendations without my input. The materials were professionally produced, clearly the result of weeks of work with Sandra Hoffman's consulting firm and our accounting team. The numbers told a story I hadn't been part of writing. Profit margins were declining due to increased overhead from new hires. Client acquisition costs were rising as we pursued larger, more competitive accounts. Investment requirements for the expansion plan would strain our cash reserves for at least 18 months. According to Elijah's analysis, the company needed stronger financial discipline and more aggressive revenue growth to remain viable. His recommendations included reducing operational expenses, implementing performance-based compensation, and consolidating decision-making authority to improve efficiency. Every suggestion pointed toward the same conclusion. The current partnership structure was holding back necessary changes. Equal decision-making authority created delays and inconsistency. Shared financial control limited strategic flexibility. Collaborative management confused employees and frustrated clients who wanted clear accountability. I listened to this presentation in stunned silence, recognizing my own company described as dysfunctional and inefficient. Elijah wasn't just proposing changes. He was building a case that our partnership itself was the primary obstacle to success. When he finished, I asked pointed questions about the underlying assumptions and data sources. Some of his financial projections seemed overly pessimistic, and several market analysis conclusions contradicted my understanding of our competitive position. Elijah deflected my questions by referencing Sandra's expertise in the accounting firm's validation of his methodology. When I suggested we table major decisions until I could review the materials more thoroughly, he expressed frustration with the delays that collaborative decision-making inevitably created. "This is exactly the problem, Luna," he said with barely contained exasperation. "We can't spend weeks analyzing every decision while opportunities pass us by. Successful companies make fast decisions and adjust course as needed." The implication was obvious. I was the obstacle preventing fast decisions. My desire to understand and validate information was reframed as indecision and resistance to change. That meeting ended without resolution, but it marked a clear turning point in our relationship. Elijah had moved beyond subtle exclusion to open criticism of our partnership structure. He was no longer trying to work around my authority. He was directly challenging its legitimacy. Over the following months, the pressure intensified. Elijah scheduled individual meetings with key employees, ostensibly to gather feedback about company culture and operational efficiency. These conversations were presented as routine management check-ins, but their real purpose became clear when several team members mentioned being asked about leadership preferences and decision-making processes. Noah Martinez was particularly troubled by his session with Elijah. He described being asked hypothetical questions about reporting structures and management styles, with subtle suggestions that clearer authority might improve project outcomes. "It felt like he was fishing for complaints about you," Noah told me privately. I kept emphasizing how well our collaborative approach works, but he seemed disappointed with my answers. Similar reports came from other long-term employees who felt uncomfortable with the implied criticism of our partnership. They valued the collaborative culture and were confused by suggestions that it was problematic or inefficient. But newer employees, particularly those hired by James Patterson, seemed more receptive to Elijah's messaging about leadership clarity and decision-making efficiency. They hadn't experienced the benefits of our collaborative approach and were more likely to accept that traditional corporate hierarchies might be superior. The division within our team reflected the larger battle for the company's future direction. Elijah was systematically building support for changes that would consolidate power under his authority while marginalizing my role and influence. The situation reached crisis level when I discovered that Elijah had been meeting with potential investors without my knowledge. Sarah Kim from Portland Venture Partners confirmed during a chance encounter at a networking event that she'd had multiple discussions with Elijah about investment opportunities. "We're very interested in what you're building," she said enthusiastically. "Elijah's vision for scaling the business is exactly what we look for in growth-stage companies." When I probed for details, Sarah described expansion plans and financial projections that went far beyond anything Elijah had shared with me. He'd apparently been developing a comprehensive growth strategy with external investors while excluding me from conversations about the company's future. That evening, I confronted Elijah directly about the investor meetings. He initially claimed they were informal conversations that hadn't progressed to serious discussions. When I pressed for specifics, he admitted that he'd been exploring options, but argued that preliminary discussions didn't require my involvement. "I'm not negotiating deals behind your back," he insisted. "I'm gathering information about possibilities. If anything serious develops, we'll discuss it together." But the pattern was clear. Elijah was systematically preparing for major changes, while keeping me uninformed and excluded. The investor meetings, employee feedback sessions, financial projections, and organizational restructuring were all pieces of a larger plan to transform the company according to his vision. I realized that our partnership was effectively over, even though the legal structure remained intact. Elijah had moved beyond collaboration to unilateral action, treating me as an obstacle to be managed rather than a partner to be consulted. The final confrontation was inevitable. It came on a Tuesday morning in March, exactly 15 years and 4 months after we'd signed our first partnership agreement in the office above the bookstore. Elijah had scheduled what he called a strategic planning session, with just the two of us present. I arrived at the conference room to find another formal presentation waiting, but this one was different. Instead of financial projections and market analysis, Elijah had prepared what amounted to an ultimatum disguised as a partnership restructuring proposal. The materials outlined a new organizational structure with Elijah as CEO and myself as Chief Technology Officer. My equity stake would remain at 50%, but decision-making authority would be reorganized to reflect operational realities and market requirements. As CEO, Elijah would have final authority over strategic decisions, financial management, and external relationships. As CTO, I would focus on technical operations, system maintenance, and project delivery. The collaborative partnership that had built the company would be replaced by a traditional corporate hierarchy. Elijah presented this restructuring as a natural evolution that would allow us both to focus on our strengths while eliminating the inefficiencies of shared decision-making. He emphasized that my technical expertise was valuable and that the CTO role would give me clear authority over operations. But the reality was obvious. I was being demoted in my own company. 15 years of equal partnership would be replaced by a subordinate role where my authority existed only at Elijah's discretion. When I rejected the proposal, Elijah's diplomatic facade finally cracked. He'd clearly expected me to accept the inevitable and was unprepared for direct resistance. "Luna, you're not seeing the bigger picture," he said with obvious frustration. "This company needs strong leadership to reach its potential. We can't keep operating like a startup when we're competing with national agencies. I pointed out that we'd built something successful through collaboration, and that abandoning our partnership principles would destroy the culture that made us unique. Elijah dismissed these concerns as sentimental attachment to outdated approaches. The conversation escalated quickly. Years of accumulated frustration and hidden resentment erupted in accusations and counter-accusations. Elijah criticized my resistance to change and unwillingness to embrace growth opportunities. I confronted him about his systematic exclusion and unilateral decision-making. Finally, Elijah said the words that would end our partnership forever. If you can't support the direction this company needs to go, maybe it's time to consider other options. It was a threat disguised as a suggestion. Accept his authority or face the consequences. After 15 years of building something together, our relationship had deteriorated to corporate power politics and implicit ultimatums. That night, I knew everything was about to change. Elijah had made his position clear. He intended to control the company with or without my cooperation. My choice was to submit to his authority or prepare for war. I chose to prepare for war. But first, I needed to understand exactly what weapons he was planning to use against me. 3 weeks after our confrontation, Elijah's strategy became crystal clear. He wasn't planning to force me out through direct conflict. He was orchestrating a legal and financial trap that would make my position untenable while protecting himself from partnership agreement violations. The first move came disguised as routine legal housekeeping. Rebecca Martinez from Keller & Associates, the law firm that had handled our corporate filings for years, requested a meeting to discuss partnership documentation updates. The session was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon, with both Elijah and myself expected to attend. I arrived at the downtown law office to find Rebecca waiting with a stack of documents and a somber expression. She'd always been straightforward in our previous interactions, but today she seemed uncomfortable, avoiding direct eye contact as she explained the purpose of our meeting. "We need to address some inconsistencies in your partnership structure," she began carefully. "The original agreement you signed 15 years ago doesn't adequately address current business realities or provide clear guidance for dispute resolution." The documents she presented were extensive revisions to our partnership agreement, ostensibly designed to clarify roles and responsibilities while protecting both partners' interests. But reading through the proposed changes revealed their true purpose. The new agreement maintained our 50-50 equity split, but introduced complex provisions for decision-making authority based on functional expertise. Strategic decisions would require partner consensus, but operational authority would be allocated according to each partner's primary responsibilities. Since Elijah had established himself as the business development and client relationship expert, he would control all external-facing decisions. Since I was positioned as the technical operations specialist, my authority would be limited to internal systems and project delivery. Most significantly, the revised agreement included detailed procedures for resolving partnership disputes. If partners couldn't reach consensus on strategic decisions, the matter would be submitted to binding arbitration. The arbitrator would be selected from a panel of business professionals with relevant industry experience. Rebecca explained these provisions as standard protections that would prevent deadlock situations while ensuring both partners maintained their equity interests. But the implications were obvious. Any major disagreement would be decided by outside arbitrators who were likely to favor traditional business practices over collaborative approaches. What happens if one partner constantly disagrees with the proposed strategic direction? I asked, already knowing the answer. Rebecca glanced at Elijah before responding. The arbitration process is designed to be fair and objective. If one partner's position is consistently contrary to sound business judgment, that would certainly factor into the arbitrator's decision. The trap was elegant and probably legal. Elijah could propose whatever changes he wanted, knowing that, External arbitrators would likely support conventional corporate wisdom over my objections. If I refused to sign the updated agreement, he could argue that I was blocking necessary legal protections and acting against the company's interests. I requested time to review the documents with my own legal counsel before signing anything. Rebecca seemed relieved that I wasn't demanding immediate answers, but Elijah's expression suggested he'd hoped for quicker resolution. "Of course," he said diplomatically. "Take whatever time you need. We just want to make sure we're protecting everyone's interests." That evening, I contacted David Park, a business attorney I'd met through the Portland Entrepreneurs Network. David specialized in partnership disputes and had a reputation for protecting smaller partners against corporate maneuvering. David's analysis of the proposed agreement confirmed my worst fears. While technically preserving my equity stake, the new provisions would effectively eliminate my decision-making authority while creating legal mechanisms for forcing my cooperation or exit. "This is sophisticated legal engineering," David explained during our consultation. "Your partner has found a way to marginalize your role while maintaining plausible deniability about his intentions. If you sign this, you'll be a minority partner in everything but name." David recommended that I not sign the revised agreement and instead propose alternative language that genuinely protected both partners' rights. But he warned that Elijah's legal strategy suggested he was prepared for extended conflict. "Someone has invested significant time and money in developing this approach," David observed. "This isn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. It's a carefully planned campaign to restructure your partnership on his terms." While I was dealing with legal maneuvering, Elijah launched the second phase of his strategy. He scheduled individual meetings with our major clients, ostensibly to discuss their satisfaction with our services and gather feedback about future needs. These client meetings were presented as routine relationship management, but their real purpose became clear when several clients mentioned concerns about our company's stability and leadership structure. Marcus Wheeler from Cascade Outdoor Gear called me directly after his meeting with Elijah. Marcus had been our primary contact there for over a decade and had always been satisfied with our work. "Luna, I'm getting mixed signals about what's happening with your company," he said bluntly. "Elijah mentioned some organizational changes that might affect our service delivery. Are you having partnership problems?" When I asked for specifics, Marcus described Elijah's comments about streamlining decision-making processes and eliminating operational inefficiencies. While never directly criticizing me, Elijah had apparently suggested that collaborative management was creating delays and confusion for clients. He implied that clearer authority structures would improve our responsiveness. Marcus continued, "I've never had problems with your team's communication, but now I'm wondering if there are issues I haven't noticed." Similar conversations with other major clients revealed the pattern. Elijah was systematically planting seeds of doubt about our current operations while positioning himself as the solution to problems that didn't actually exist. The most damaging conversation was with Jennifer Walsh from Pacific Northwest Bank, our largest corporate client. Jennifer had worked exclusively with me on their digital marketing strategy for 3 years and had consistently praised our collaborative approach. But after her meeting with Elijah, Jennifer requested a formal review of our service delivery processes and client communication protocols. She wanted written documentation of our organizational structure and clear identification of decision-making authorities for all aspects of their account. "We need to ensure continuity and accountability," Jennifer explained during our call. "If there are going to be changes in your leadership structure, we want to understand how that might affect our partnership." Jennifer's concerns were diplomatically expressed, but the implication was clear. She was questioning whether our company was stable enough to handle their account. Elijah had successfully transformed a satisfied client relationship into a source of pressure for organizational changes. The client pressure campaign was coordinated with internal employee management that followed similar patterns. James Patterson scheduled performance reviews with all senior staff, focusing on leadership preferences and communication effectiveness. These reviews were framed as routine HR processes, but employees reported being asked leading questions about management clarity and decision-making efficiency. The sessions seemed designed to identify staff members who might support traditional corporate hierarchies over collaborative approaches. Emma Rodriguez, our lead project manager, described her review session as particularly uncomfortable. James had asked her to evaluate different leadership styles and their impact on project outcomes, with obvious emphasis on the benefits of clear authority structures. It felt like he was trying to get me to criticize the current partnership arrangement, Emma told me privately. When I said our collaborative approach works well, he kept pushing for examples of when shared decision-making might have caused delays. The employee review process was creating anxiety throughout the team. People were worried about saying the wrong thing or being perceived as disloyal to one partner or the other. The collaborative culture that had made our workplace special was being poisoned by implied pressure to choose sides. Meanwhile, Noah Martinez brought me information that revealed the financial dimension of Elijah's strategy. As our longest-serving employee, Noah had maintained relationships with freelancers and contractors we'd worked with over the years. Through these connections, Noah learned that Elijah had been quietly reaching out to our key independent contractors, offering them exclusive arrangements that would guarantee steady work in exchange for loyalty to his leadership. Marcus Thompson, a web developer we'd used for overflow projects, confirmed that Elijah had approached him about a potential staff position with improved benefits and guaranteed hours. The offer was contingent on supporting upcoming organizational changes that would strengthen executive leadership. He made it sound like you might be stepping back from active management, Marcus told Noah. The impression I got was that he'd be running things going forward and wanted to make sure he had reliable technical support. This contractor recruitment campaign served multiple purposes. It would secure technical resources that I might otherwise rely on for independent projects. It would also create a network of external allies who had financial incentives to support Elijah's version of events if partnership disputes became public. The most sophisticated element of Elijah's strategy involved financial manipulation that would be difficult to detect without careful analysis. Our company's accounting firm, Henderson & Associates, began implementing new financial reporting procedures that would provide greater transparency and improved management oversight. These changes seemed reasonable on the surface. Better financial controls are generally beneficial for growing companies. But the new procedures systematically shifted financial authority away from equal partnership toward centralized management control. Purchase approvals that had previously required both partners' signatures now went through James Patterson's office for amounts under $10,000. Expense reimbursements followed new protocols that gave the COO discretionary authority over operational spending. Most significantly, client payment processing was centralized under a new system that provided detailed analytics about revenue sources and profit margins by client and service type. This information was valuable for strategic planning, but it also gave whoever controlled the system comprehensive knowledge about the company's financial vulnerabilities. Sarah Chen, our staff accountant, mentioned during a casual conversation that she'd received updated instructions about financial reporting and partner distributions. The new procedures required more detailed documentation and approval processes for any non-standard transactions. It's probably good to have better controls, Sarah said uncertainty. But it's definitely more complicated than how we used to handle things. When I asked for specifics, Sarah described approval workflows that would make it difficult for me to access company funds for anything beyond routine salary draws without extensive documentation and James Patterson's oversight. The financial controls were presented as professional improvements, but their practical effect would be to limit my ability to operate independently if the partnership continued deteriorating. Elijah was systematically cutting off potential escape routes while maintaining plausible business justifications for every change. By late spring, the scope of Elijah's campaign became undeniable. He was simultaneously attacking my legal standing, client relationships, employee loyalty, contractor networks, and financial access. Each element was individually defensible as reasonable business improvement, but collectively they constituted a comprehensive strategy to force my capitulation or departure. The pressure was affecting my health and personal relationships. I was spending sleepless nights analyzing documents and planning responses to each new development. My work quality was suffering as I devoted increasing time to partnership politics instead of client service. My wife noticed the changes immediately. Karen had always been supportive of my work, but she was concerned about the stress I was bringing home every evening. Our dinner conversations increasingly focused on business problems rather than family life. "You're letting this consume you," she said one evening after I'd spent another hour reviewing legal documents at the kitchen table. "Whatever Elijah is planning, you can't control it by obsessing over every detail." Karen was right, but I felt trapped by circumstances that seemed to demand constant vigilance. Every day brought new developments that required analysis and response. Stepping back from the conflict would mean surrendering ground to Elijah's systematic campaign. The breaking point came when I discovered that Elijah had scheduled a board meeting without my knowledge. Morrison Chen Digital Marketing had never had a formal board of directors. Our partnership agreement had never required external oversight or advisory structures. But Elijah had apparently been developing plans for corporate governance changes that would introduce outside oversight aligned with his growth strategy. The proposed board would include Sandra Hoffman, representatives from potential investor groups, and selected clients who could provide industry expertise. I learned about the board meeting from Jennifer Walsh at Pacific Northwest Bank, who mentioned receiving an invitation to serve as an industry advisor for our new governance structure. She was calling to confirm her understanding of the role and responsibilities. "I'm honored that you're considering me for your advisory board," Jennifer said. "I think external oversight could help with the organizational challenges Elijah mentioned. When is the first meeting scheduled?" I managed to deflect Jennifer's questions while internally processing the implications of what she'd revealed. Elijah was creating external authorities that would legitimize his control while providing cover for marginalizing my role in the company. That evening, I made the decision that would define everything that followed. Instead of continuing to react defensively to Elijah's moves, I would take the initiative and use the one advantage he didn't know I still possessed. For 15 years, I'd been the architect of our company's technical infrastructure. I'd designed every system, chosen every platform, and maintained administrative access to every critical component of our digital operations. Elijah's security audit had closed official doors, but I'd kept backup keys to everything that mattered. If Elijah wanted to play corporate warfare, I would remind him that our business was built on technology he didn't understand and couldn't control without my cooperation. The password he thought he'd taken away was just one of many ways into systems I'd created and could manipulate at will. It was time to show him exactly what just business really meant when you tried to cut out the person who built everything from the ground up. The secret board meeting was scheduled for Thursday, May 15th, at the Multnomah Athletic Club in downtown Portland. I discovered this when Elijah's assistant, Monica Fernandez, accidentally copied me on an email confirming catering arrangements for 8 people. Monica immediately sent a follow-up message claiming the original email was meant for a different client meeting, but the damage was done. I now knew exactly when and where Elijah planned to formalize his takeover of the company. The guest list, which I pieced together from various sources, was a carefully chosen collection of allies and authority figures. Sandra Hoffman would provide strategic consulting credibility. 2 representatives from Portland Venture Partners would bring investment expertise. Jennifer Walsh and Marcus Wheeler would serve as satisfied client references. James Patterson would present operational improvements under new leadership. The meeting's agenda, according to Noah's intelligence gathering from Monica's desk calendar, included presentations on market opportunities, organizational restructuring recommendations, and partnership governance improvements. The final item was listed simply as Partnership Resolution, corporate euphemism for my removal from active management. I had 6 days to prepare my response. 6 days to gather intelligence, marshal resources, and execute a strategy that would expose Elijah's deception while protecting my position in the company I'd built. My first move was comprehensive data collection. Using my hidden administrative key access, I began downloading 15 years of company records, emails, financial transactions, client communications, project files, personnel records, and strategic planning documents. The sheer volume of data was staggering. Our email servers alone contained over 2 million messages dating back to our earliest Gmail accounts. Financial records filled multiple database tables with granular transaction details. Project management. Systems held detailed logs of every client interaction and deliverable. Working through the nights, I organized this information into searchable archives that would allow me to quickly locate specific evidence when needed. I also created backup copies stored on personal servers that Elijah couldn't access or delete. The email analysis revealed the most damaging evidence. For the past 18 months, Elijah had been conducting an extensive correspondence with Sandra Hoffman about partnership optimization and management restructuring. Their exchanges showed clear intent to marginalize my role while maintaining legal compliance with our partnership agreement. One particularly revealing email chain from March discussed the timing of various pressure tactics. Sandra had recommended introducing client concerns before implementing financial controls, suggesting that external pressure would make internal changes seem more reasonable. Luna will be more receptive to organizational adjustments if she believes. Clients are demanding them, Sandra had written. The key is making her feel that resistance would harm the business rather than helping it. Elijah's response showed his complete agreement with this manipulation strategy. I'll handle the client conversations carefully. She trusts those relationships, so concerns from Marcus and Jennifer should carry significant weight. These emails documented deliberate deception designed to trick me into accepting subordination through manufactured client dissatisfaction. There would be devastating evidence if the partnership dispute ever reached legal proceedings. The financial data revealed another layer of manipulation. Elijah had been systematically adjusting expense allocations and revenue attributions to make collaborative management appear less profitable than centralized control. Consulting fees paid to Sandra's firm were categorized as necessary strategic planning rather than costs associated with partnership restructuring. Time spent on client relationship management was attributed to Elijah's efforts, while technical project work was classified as routine operational expense. These accounting adjustments created a financial narrative that supported his argument for leadership changes. According to the manipulated data, Elijah's activities generated higher profit margins and client satisfaction than my technical contributions. But the raw transaction records told a different story. Client payments consistently correlated with project deliverables I'd managed, while Elijah's networking activities showed minimal direct revenue impact. The manufactured financial analysis was contradicted by objective performance data. Armed with this evidence, I reached out to David Park for legal advice about my options. David's analysis confirmed that Elijah's tactics, while ethically questionable, were probably not legally actionable unless I could prove deliberate fraud or breach of fiduciary duty. The emails show deceptive intent, but business partners are allowed to advocate for organizational changes, David explained. Unless you can demonstrate that he's stolen company assets or violated explicit partnership obligations, this remains a business dispute rather than illegal activity. However, David identified several defensive strategies that could protect my position. The partnership agreement required unanimous consent for any changes to corporate structure or governance. I could simply refuse to approve the proposed board of directors or organizational modifications. The problem is that standoff situations usually favor the partner with operational control, David warned. If he's managing day-to-day operations and client relationships, he can make your position increasingly untenable through legitimate business decisions. I needed leverage that would force Elijah to negotiate rather than continue his war of attrition. That leverage would come from demonstrating my continued importance to the company's technical operations. My plan required precise timing and careful execution. I would wait until the secret board meeting was underway, then systematically demonstrate my control over the company's digital infrastructure. The goal wasn't to damage the business, but to prove that Elijah couldn't simply cut me out without serious consequences. On Wednesday evening, I began implementing security protocols that would showcase my administrative authority. I started with non-critical systems that would create inconvenience without affecting client service. The office Wi-Fi network was the first target. I changed the administrative password and modified access controls so that only devices with specific MAC addresses could connect. James Patterson's laptop, Sandra Hoffman's phone, and several other devices were quietly blocked from network access. Next, I adjusted permissions on our project management system. Key stakeholders found themselves unable to access certain project files or update client status reports. The restrictions were subtle enough to seem like technical glitches rather than deliberate interference. The email system required more careful handling since it was critical for client communication. Instead of blocking access entirely, I implemented message filtering rules that would redirect certain types of emails to a quarantine folder I controlled. Messages about the board meeting, partnership restructuring, or organizational changes would be delayed until I chose to release them. Bye. Thursday morning, the office was experiencing a series of frustrating but apparently random technical problems. The Wi-Fi was spotty, project management tools were sluggish, and several important emails seemed to have disappeared into cyberspace. James Patterson spent the morning on the phone with our IT support contractor, trying to diagnose issues that couldn't be resolved without administrative access I controlled. The contractor suggested that complex network problems sometimes required system architects to investigate underlying configuration issues. Maybe Luna should take a look at this, suggested Tommy Liu, the lead technician from our support company. She designed most of these systems and understands their architecture better than anyone. James deflected the suggestion, insisting that the problems were temporary glitches that would resolve themselves. But by noon, the technical difficulties were creating client service issues that couldn't be ignored. Elijah called me directly to discuss the morning's problems. His tone was carefully neutral, but I could hear underlying tension as he described the various system failures. "We're having some technical difficulties that are affecting productivity," he said diplomatically. "James thinks it might be related to the recent security updates. Could you take a look when you have time?" I agreed to investigate, knowing that my examination would reveal problems that could only be resolved with my cooperation. The timing was perfect. The board meeting was scheduled to begin in 3 hours, and Elijah was about to learn exactly how much he needed my technical expertise. Error. 2 p.m., I received a text message from Noah Martinez. Meeting started early. They're in the MAC conference room. The secret board meeting was underway, with Elijah presenting his case for organizational restructuring to his carefully selected audience. It was time for my demonstration. I started with the company's main website, implementing a maintenance mode that would display a professional message about system updates while preventing normal access. The site remained functional for existing users, but appear offline to new visitors trying to evaluate our services. Next, I triggered backup procedures on our database servers. This was a legitimate maintenance activity that I performed regularly, but it would temporarily slow system performance and create warning messages that would alarm anyone monitoring our infrastructure. The client relationship management system was my most dramatic target. I didn't delete or damage any data, but I temporarily restricted access to contact records and project histories. Suddenly, no one could pull up client information or review account details without my intervention. Finally, I implemented emergency security protocols on our financial systems. All transaction processing was suspended pending administrator review, and access to accounting data was limited to essential personnel only. Within 30 minutes, the company's digital operations were effectively paralyzed. Everything looked professional and maintained. No data was lost or corrupted, but normal business functions were impossible without my administrative access. My phone started ringing immediately. James Patterson called first, reporting that critical systems were experiencing coordinated failures that seemed to require immediate attention. Monica Fernandez called next, panicking about her inability to access client files for an important proposal deadline. Then came the call I'd been waiting for. Elijah's voice was tight with controlled anger as he described the crisis that was unfolding during his crucial board meeting. "Luna, we have a serious situation," he said, barely maintaining professional composure. "Multiple systems are down, and we can't access essential business functions. I need you to drop everything and fix this immediately." I calmly explained that I was investigating what appeared to be a sophisticated security incident that might require extensive remediation. The problems were serious enough that I would need administrative access to multiple systems that had been restricted under the recent security audit. "How long will this take?" Elijah demanded, clearly aware that his board presentation was being undermined by the technical crisis. I told him that complex system restorations were unpredictable and that I couldn't provide a timeline until I understood the full scope of the issues. However, I mentioned that having proper administrative credentials would significantly accelerate the diagnostic process. There was a long pause before Elijah responded. I could hear muffled voices in the background. His board meeting was clearly being disrupted by reports of the technical emergency. "Do whatever you need to do," he said finally. "We'll discuss access permissions later. Right now, just get our systems back online." I assured him that I would begin working immediately and provide updates as the situation developed. After ending the call, I waited exactly 1 hour before beginning the restoration process. The systems came back online in reverse order of their failure. Financial processing resumed first, followed by client relationship management, then database, performance optimization, and finally website restoration. Each system recovery was accompanied by detailed technical logs that demonstrated my administrative authority and essential role in maintaining operations. By 4:30 p.m., all systems were functioning normally, but the message had been delivered clearly. Elijah's board meeting had been disrupted by a crisis that only I could resolve. His presentation about organizational efficiency and operational control had been undermined by practical demonstration of his dependence on my technical expertise. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Sandra Hoffman called me directly that evening, requesting a private meeting to discuss the day's events and explore potential solutions to the ongoing partnership tensions. "Today's technical issues highlighted some important operational dependencies," she said carefully. "I think we need to have a frank conversation about how to structure the business in a way that recognizes everyone's essential contributions." Her tone was completely different from our previous interactions. Instead of subtle condescension about partnership inefficiencies, Sandra was now speaking with the respect accorded to someone who held real power in the organization. I agreed to meet with her, knowing that the conversation would focus on negotiating a new balance of authority rather than discussing my marginalization. Elijah's call came an hour later. His voice was strained with exhaustion and frustration as he suggested, "We schedule an emergency partnership meeting to address the day's developments and plan for more stable operations going forward. We need to have an honest conversation about roles and responsibilities," he said, unconsciously echoing the language I'd been using for months about our deteriorating collaboration. But there was something different in his tone now, a recognition that I wasn't the obstacle to be eliminated, but the partner who still held essential keys to everything we'd built together. The war wasn't over, but the balance of power had shifted dramatically. Elijah had learned that just business worked both ways, and that 15 years of technical expertise couldn't be replaced by corporate restructuring and administrative maneuvering. Now, we would find out whether he was willing to return to genuine partnership or if he would escalate the conflict even further. Either way, I was no longer fighting from a position of weakness. The emergency partnership meeting was scheduled for Monday morning at 9 a.m. in our main conference room. For the first time in months, Elijah and I would sit across from each other as equals, each holding cards that could destroy what we'd built together. I arrived 15 minutes early to prepare the room and review my strategy one final time. The evidence files were organized on my laptop: emails, financial records, client communications, and technical logs that documented 15 years of collaboration and 18 months of systematic betrayal. David Park had advised me to focus on forward-looking solutions rather than past grievances. "You've proven your leverage," he'd said during our weekend preparation session. "Now use it to negotiate a sustainable partnership structure or a clean exit on favorable terms." But I knew Elijah well enough to predict he wouldn't surrender easily. He'd spent too much time and energy orchestrating his takeover to abandon it, without exhausting every possible angle of attack. He arrived precisely at 9 a.m., accompanied by Sandra Hoffman and armed with his own stack of documents. His expression was controlled but tense. The confident executive persona had been replaced by a careful negotiator who understood he was facing a more formidable opponent than expected. "Thank you for making time for this conversation," Elijah began formally. Thursday's technical difficulties highlighted some important operational vulnerabilities that we need to address systematically. I nodded politely, waiting to see which direction he would take. Would he acknowledge the power dynamics that had shifted, or would he try to regain control through different tactics? Sandra opened her leather portfolio and withdrew a new set of partnership modification proposals. These documents were significantly different from the previous legal trap. Instead of marginalizing my authority, they suggested a true power-sharing arrangement with clearly defined spheres of influence. "We've reconsidered the organizational structure recommendations based on recent developments," Sandra explained diplomatically. "It's clear that the company's technical infrastructure requires specialized expertise that can't be easily replaced or managed through traditional corporate hierarchies." The new proposal divided company authority along functional lines that recognized my technical leadership while preserving Elijah's business development role. I would have complete autonomy over all technical decisions, system architecture, and operational infrastructure. Elijah would control client relationships, strategic planning, and external partnerships. Financial decisions would require unanimous consent for amounts over $25,000, with smaller expenditures approved by the partner responsible for the relevant functional area. Neither partner could make major business decisions without the other's explicit agreement. Most importantly, the revised agreement included detailed succession planning and exit procedures. If either partner chose to leave the business, they would retain their equity stake but transfer operational control to the remaining partner. The departing partner would receive ongoing profit distributions but couldn't interfere with business operations. It was a reasonable proposal that addressed many of my concerns about Elijah's previous power grab. But I remained skeptical about his sudden willingness to share authority after months of systematic exclusion. "This is certainly more balanced than your previous suggestions," I acknowledged carefully. "But I'm curious about what changed your perspective so dramatically between last week and today." Elijah's jaw tightened slightly. My question had touched on his embarrassing loss of control during the board meeting crisis. Sandra smoothly intervened before he could respond with something that might escalate tensions. Thursday's events demonstrated that successful partnerships require mutual respect for each partner's essential contributions, she said diplomatically. Sometimes organizational challenges help clarify what's truly important for long-term stability. I appreciated her tactful phrasing, but I wanted direct acknowledgement of what had actually happened. Elijah had attempted to eliminate my role in the company through legal maneuvering and client manipulation. His current willingness to negotiate stemmed from recognition that I couldn't be removed without destroying the business we'd built together. Before we discuss future arrangements, I think we need to address some recent developments that have affected our partnership, I said, opening my laptop and accessing the evidence files I'd compiled. Elijah's expression shifted to wary attention as I began displaying email communications between him and Sandra about partnership optimization strategies. The messages clearly showed deliberate planning to marginalize my role while maintaining legal compliance with our original agreement. These communications suggest that recent organizational proposals weren't good faith efforts to improve the business, I continued, scrolling through months of coordinated tactics. They appear to be components of a systematic campaign to force my subordination or departure. Sandra's professional composure remained intact, but I noticed her taking careful notes as I presented evidence of their collaboration. She was probably calculating legal exposure and reputational damage if these materials became public. Elijah finally spoke, his voice tight with controlled anger. Those emails were exploratory discussions about legitimate business improvements. Every growing company needs to evaluate organizational efficiency and leadership effectiveness. I nodded thoughtfully and opened the financial analysis I'd compiled. You're right that organizational evaluation is legitimate, but this analysis suggests that recent changes in expense allocation and revenue attribution were designed to create false evidence supporting your leadership arguments. The spreadsheets showed how consulting fees, project costs, and client relationship expenses had been systematically reassigned to support a narrative about collaborative management inefficiency. The manipulated financial data contradicted objective performance metrics that demonstrated equal partner contributions. These accounting adjustments weren't implemented to improve financial reporting, I continued calmly. They were designed to manufacture evidence that your business development activities generated higher profit margins than my technical contributions. Sandra leaned forward to examine the financial analysis more closely. As a former McKinsey consultant, she understood immediately that the data manipulation I'd uncovered could constitute fraud if the modified reports had been used to influence investor decisions or partnership agreements. Luna, I think you're misinterpreting routine accounting categorization changes, Elijah said, but his tone lacked conviction. He knew I had access to historical financial records that would expose any attempts to explain away the manipulated data. I closed the laptop and looked directly at both of them. I'm not interested in pursuing legal action or public confrontation about these discoveries, but I need to understand whether you're genuinely committed to collaborative partnership or if this new proposal is just another tactical maneuver. The room fell silent as Elijah processed the implications of my statement. I had evidence that could damage his reputation and potentially trigger legal consequences, but I was offering to set it aside in exchange for authentic partnership restoration. Sandra broke the silence with characteristic directness. What would authentic partnership look like from your perspective, Luna? I outlined my requirements clearly. First, all previous organizational changes implemented without my consent would be reversed. James Patterson's COO position would be eliminated, and his responsibilities would be redistributed between Elijah and myself according to our original functional areas. Second, the financial control systems that had been centralized under James's authority would return to joint partner oversight. Major expenditures would require both signatures, and expense reimbursements would follow our original simplified procedures. Third, client relationship management would be genuinely collaborative. Neither partner would meet with major clients without the other's knowledge, and any discussions about company leadership or organizational structure would involve both partners equally. Fourth, all external consulting arrangements would be jointly approved and managed. Sandra's firm would conclude their current engagement, and any future strategic consulting would be selected and supervised by both partners together. Finally, I wanted a formal commitment that partnership decisions would be made through direct negotiation between us, without manipulation through employee feedback sessions, client pressure campaigns, or manufactured external crises. Essentially, you want to return to the partnership structure we had 5 years ago, Elijah summarized, his frustration barely concealed. I want to return to the collaborative relationship that built this company, I corrected. The structure that made us successful before you decided it was holding us back. Sandra proposed a brief recess so she and Elijah could discuss my requirements privately. I agreed, using the time to call David Park and update him on the negotiations. They're taking your demands seriously because you've demonstrated real leverage, David confirmed. But be prepared for counteroffers that might seem reasonable while preserving some of Elijah's accumulated advantages. When we reconvened, Elijah presented a modified proposal that accepted most of my requirements while requesting concessions in 2 areas. He wanted to maintain James Patterson in a reduced consulting role focused exclusively on administrative efficiency, and he wanted to preserve some of the financial reporting improvements that had been implemented recently. I rejected both requests. James Patterson's presence would be a constant reminder of Elijah's attempt to marginalize my authority, and his consulting role would provide ongoing opportunities for indirect influence. The financial reporting improvements were the mechanisms through which expense allocation had been manipulated to support false narratives about partnership effectiveness. If you're serious about restoring collaborative partnership, these elements can't remain, I stated firmly. They're symbols and tools of the hierarchical approach that nearly destroyed our relationship. Elijah's facade of diplomatic negotiation finally cracked. Luna, you're being unreasonable. James has valuable skills that could benefit the company, and the financial controls provide legitimate business protections. James was hired without my consent to implement organizational changes I opposed, I replied. His continued presence would undermine any agreement we reach today. As for the financial controls, they were used to manipulate data in support of your takeover attempt. I don't trust them or their implementation. Sandra intervened before Elijah could respond with something that might sabotage the negotiations entirely. Perhaps we could address these concerns through alternative approaches. What if James transitioned to an external consulting relationship with specific project-based assignments? And what if the financial reporting procedures were modified to ensure transparent joint oversight? I considered her suggestions carefully. An external consulting arrangement would remove James from daily operations while preserving access to his legitimate administrative skills. Modified financial procedures could provide business benefits while eliminating the manipulation opportunities that had been exploited. I could accept those modifications if they include specific safeguards, I said. James's external consulting would require joint approval for each project, with clearly defined scope and deliverables. Financial procedures would be jointly designed and implemented, with both partners having equal access to all data and analysis. Elijah nodded reluctantly, recognizing that these concessions were necessary to reach an agreement. Sandra began drafting formal language that would incorporate all the negotiated terms into a revised partnership agreement. The process took 3 hours, with careful attention to details that would prevent future misunderstandings or manipulation. When we finished, we had a comprehensive document that restored collaborative partnership while incorporating legitimate business improvements. But the most important element wasn't written in the legal agreement. It was the acknowledgement that our partnership had survived its most serious crisis through direct confrontation and honest negotiation. As we prepared to sign the new agreement, Elijah finally addressed what had happened over the past 18 months. Luna, I want you to know that I never intended for things to get so adversarial between us. I genuinely believed that stronger leadership would help the company reach its potential. I appreciated his attempt at reconciliation, but his explanation still framed the conflict as a disagreement about business strategy, rather than acknowledging the betrayal of trust that had nearly ended our partnership. Elijah, I understand your concerns about growth and efficiency, I replied. But the way you pursued those goals, through secret planning, client manipulation, and systematic exclusion, damaged something that took 15 years to build. Trust isn't just about business strategy. It's about how we treat each other when we disagree. He was quiet for a long moment before responding. You're right. I lost sight of what made our partnership work in the first place. I hope we can rebuild that trust over time. It was the closest he would come to admitting that his campaign against me had been fundamentally wrong. I accepted his statement as the beginning of a process that would take time and consistent actions to complete. We signed the new partnership agreement at 3:30 p.m. on a Monday afternoon in May, exactly 15 years and 5 months after we'd started the company in my garage in Portland. The document restored our collaborative relationship while incorporating lessons learned from our recent crisis. But more importantly, we'd both learned that partnerships require constant attention and mutual respect to survive the pressures of growth and change. The crisis that nearly destroyed us had ultimately strengthened our understanding of what made our collaboration valuable. 6 months later, Morrison Chen Digital Marketing was more successful than ever. We'd rebuilt trust through consistent actions and open communication. Our employees were relieved to return to the collaborative culture they valued. Our clients appreciated the stability and renewed focus on their success. Elijah never attempted another takeover, and I never again let partnership tensions accumulate without direct address. We'd learned that honest confrontation, while painful, was healthier than polite avoidance of difficult conversations. The password that Elijah thought would cut me out forever had become the key that unlocked a stronger partnership. Sometimes the most valuable access isn't to computer systems. It's to understanding what really matters in the relationships that define our lives. Just Business has taught us both that the best business is built on trust, respect, and genuine partnership. And that was a lesson worth 15 years of learning together. 3 months after signing our renewed partnership agreement, I thought the worst was behind us. The company was operating smoothly, client relationships had stabilized, and our team seemed relieved to return to familiar collaborative processes. But I was about to learn that corporate warfare leaves scars that don't heal as quickly as legal documents can be signed. The first indication of lingering problems came from an unexpected source. Rachel Torres, a senior marketing coordinator who'd joined the company during Elijah's expansion phase, requested a private meeting to discuss her career development concerns. Rachel had been one of the newer employees who'd seemed more receptive to James Patterson's hierarchical management style. During the recent crisis, she'd expressed frustration with what she perceived as unclear authority structures and inefficient decision-making processes. "Luna, I want to be direct about something that's been bothering me," Rachel said as we sat in my office on a Wednesday afternoon. "The recent changes have created uncertainty about growth opportunities and career advancement paths." She explained that several newer employees were confused about the company's direction and concerned that the return to collaborative management might limit their professional development. They'd been attracted to Morrison Chen by Elijah's promises of rapid expansion and corporate structure that would create clear advancement hierarchies. Under the previous organizational plan, I could see a path toward becoming a department manager. "Within 2 years," Rachel continued. "Now I'm not sure what leadership opportunities will be available or how promotions will be determined." Her concerns revealed an unexpected consequence of our partnership restoration. While long-term employees had welcomed the return to collaborative culture, newer staff members felt displaced by changes that eliminated the corporate ladder they'd expected to climb. I assured Rachel that career advancement opportunities would continue to exist, but they might look different from traditional corporate hierarchies. Our flat organizational structure emphasized skill development and increased responsibility rather than formal titles and management layers. But Rachel's feedback highlighted a broader challenge I hadn't anticipated. The team that had grown to 35 employees during our expansion now included people with fundamentally different expectations about workplace culture and professional development. This generational divide became more apparent during our monthly all-hands meeting. When I announced that we were discontinuing formal performance reviews in favor of ongoing collaborative feedback, the response split clearly along tenure lines. Employees who'd been with us for more than 5 years responded positively, remembering how the collaborative approach had supported their growth and development. But newer team members seemed uncertain about how their contributions would be recognized and rewarded without formal evaluation structures. Emma Rodriguez, now our most senior project manager, noticed the division immediately. After the meeting, she approached me with observations that would prove prophetic. "The newer people don't understand what we're trying to preserve," Emma said thoughtfully. "They never experienced the culture that made this place special. To them, we're eliminating structure rather than restoring collaboration." Emma was right. The employees hired during Elijah's corporate transformation had been attracted by promises of professional advancement through traditional hierarchies. Our return to collaborative management felt like a step backward rather than a restoration of founding principles. This cultural tension created an opening for new problems that I hadn't anticipated. While Elijah was honoring our partnership agreement in letter and spirit, some of his previous allies were still operating according to the organizational vision they'd embraced. Sandra Hoffman's consulting contract had been terminated as agreed, but her influence lingered through employees who'd internalized her recommendations about leadership effectiveness and operational efficiency. They continued advocating for management structures that would create clear authority chains and accountability measures. The most persistent advocate was, surprisingly, Noah Martinez, my longest-serving employee and closest ally during the recent crisis. Noah had supported me throughout Elijah's takeover attempt, but he'd also absorbed some concerns about the company's ability to compete with larger agencies that had more sophisticated organizational structures. During a coffee conversation in late August, Noah raised questions that revealed how deeply Sandra's corporate philosophy had penetrated our team culture. "Luna, I've been thinking about our client acquisition challenges," Noah began carefully. "Some of the larger prospects we're pursuing seem more comfortable working with agencies that have clear executive leadership and formal account management hierarchies." He described recent sales presentations where potential clients had asked detailed questions about our organizational structure and decision-making processes. Several prospects had expressed concerns about accountability and responsiveness when working with companies that had shared leadership models. "I'm not suggesting we abandon our collaborative approach," Noah continued, "but maybe we need to present a more conventional external image while maintaining our internal culture." His suggestion was reasonable and well-intentioned, but it revealed how Elijah's arguments about market competitiveness continued to influence even my strongest supporters. The idea that we needed to disguise our collaborative nature to win business implied that our founding principles were marketplace liabilities. I understood Noah's concerns, but I'd learned that compromising core values for short-term business advantages usually led to longer-term cultural erosion. Once we started presenting false external images, internal reality would gradually shift to match the performance. The client acquisition challenges Noah mentioned were real, but they reflected broader market trends rather than specific problems with our organizational structure. The digital marketing industry was consolidating around larger agencies with corporate backing, and independent firms were facing increased pressure regardless of their management approaches. Rather than adjusting our culture to match market expectations, I believed we needed to find clients who valued the collaborative approach that made our work distinctive. This strategy required patience and selectivity, but it would build a sustainable business around our authentic strengths. However, implementing this approach proved more difficult than I'd anticipated. The pressure to compromise came from multiple directions, including sources I'd never expected to challenge our restored partnership. The first major test came when we received an acquisition inquiry from Digital Synergy Group, a national agency network that was expanding into the Pacific Northwest market. Their initial offer was substantially higher than the previous proposal from Digital Dynamics, $18 million for complete acquisition with retention packages for key personnel. The timing seemed suspicious. We'd just restored partnership, stability, and were beginning to address team culture challenges. An acquisition offer that could resolve financial concerns while eliminating organizational tensions was almost too convenient to be coincidental. My suspicions proved correct when I discovered that the inquiry had been initiated through Sandra Hoffman's network. Although her consulting contract with us had ended, she maintained relationships with corporate development executives who specialized in agency acquisitions. The acquisition proposal wasn't a random market opportunity. It was another attempt to pressure us toward organizational changes that would eliminate collaborative management in favor of corporate hierarchies. When I shared this discovery with Elijah, his response revealed how much trust still needed to be rebuilt between us. Instead of immediately rejecting the manipulative offer, he wanted to explore whether the acquisition might actually benefit our employees and clients. "Luna, I know you're suspicious of anything connected to Sandra," he said during our discussion, "but $18 million is a significant opportunity that we should evaluate objectively." His willingness to consider the offer, despite its questionable origins, showed that he still harbored doubts about our ability to compete independently. The collaborative partnership we'd restored legally hadn't yet eliminated his attraction to corporate solutions for business challenges. I reminded Elijah that we'd previously decided against acquisition offers because we valued the independence and culture that made our work meaningful. The higher dollar amount didn't change the fundamental question about whether we wanted to surrender control to external corporate management. But this time we're evaluating from a position of strength rather than crisis, Elijah argued. We could negotiate terms that preserve our team culture while providing resources for larger growth opportunities. His optimism about negotiating favorable terms reflected a fundamental misunderstanding about how corporate acquisitions actually worked. Large agency networks didn't pay premium prices to preserve unique cultures. They acquired companies to integrate them into standardized operational models. The acquisition discussion revealed that our partnership restoration had addressed legal and organizational issues without fully resolving the philosophical differences that had created our original conflict. Elijah still believed that scale and corporate resources were necessary for long-term success, while I remained convinced that sustainable growth required maintaining our distinctive collaborative approach. This philosophical tension came to a head during our September partnership review meeting. What should have been a routine discussion about quarterly performance became a comprehensive examination of our strategic direction and long-term compatibility. The financial numbers were encouraging. Revenue had stabilized after the summer's organizational adjustments, and client satisfaction scores were higher than they'd been in over a year. Our collaborative approach was producing excellent results for existing clients, even if it wasn't, attracting large corporate prospects. But Elijah interpreted the same data differently. He saw stable performance as evidence that we'd reached a growth plateau that could only be overcome through organizational evolution or strategic partnerships. "We're succeeding within our current market segment," he acknowledged, "but we're not expanding into larger opportunities that could provide security and advancement for our growing team." I countered that sustainable success required building on our authentic strengths rather than chasing market segments that didn't value our collaborative approach. The employees who joined us seeking corporate advancement might be better served by companies that could provide traditional hierarchical structures. "Are you suggesting we should encourage team members to leave if they want corporate career paths?" Elijah asked, clearly troubled by the implications. It was a fair question that went to the heart of our cultural identity. Were we obligated to provide conventional advancement opportunities for employees who joined with different expectations? Or should we focus on serving people who valued our collaborative environment? I believed that trying to be everything to everyone would ultimately satisfy no one. We needed to be clear about our values and culture, attracting people who wanted to work in our collaborative environment while helping others find opportunities that better matched their career goals. This conversation led to a breakthrough that neither of us had anticipated. Instead of continuing to debate whether our collaborative approach was viable, we began discussing how to implement it more effectively with our current team composition. The solution emerged from recognizing that collaboration didn't require organizational flatness or the absence of specialization. We could maintain collaborative decision-making while creating clear expertise areas and professional development paths that satisfied different employee needs. Over the following weeks, we developed a hybrid approach that preserved collaborative culture while providing structure that newer employees could understand and navigate. Instead of eliminating all hierarchies, we created expertise-based leadership roles that rotated based on project requirements and skill development goals. Noah Martinez became our lead technical strategist, responsible for coordinating complex implementations across multiple client accounts. Rachel Torres accepted a new role as client experience coordinator, focusing on service delivery optimization and satisfaction measurement. These roles provided advancement opportunities and increased responsibility while maintaining collaborative decision-making for strategic issues. Team members could develop specialized expertise and leadership skills without abandoning the cultural values that made our workplace distinctive. The hybrid structure also addressed client concerns about accountability and responsiveness. External prospects could identify clear points of contact and expertise areas, while benefiting from our collaborative approach to problem-solving and creative development. Most importantly, the new structure emerged from internal discussion and consensus rather than external pressure or corporate templates. We were evolving our culture organically based on team needs and business requirements rather than abandoning it in favor of conventional alternatives. By October, the cultural tensions that had threatened our restored partnership were beginning to resolve through practical innovation rather than philosophical compromise. We'd learned that collaboration could adapt and grow without losing its essential characteristics. The acquisition offer from Digital Synergy Group was politely declined with explanation that we were committed to independent growth based on our collaborative strengths. Several team members who'd been uncertain about career opportunities began embracing their new roles and the professional development they provided. But most significantly, Elijah and I had worked through our philosophical differences by focusing on practical solutions rather than abstract principles. Our partnership was stronger because we'd learned to address disagreements directly, while maintaining respect for each other's perspectives and concerns. The password that had once threatened to cut me out of my own company had become a metaphor for the access and trust that genuine partnerships require. We'd both learned that the most important systems couldn't be controlled through administrative privileges. They had to be built through consistent collaboration and mutual respect. As we approached our 16th anniversary, Morrison Chen Digital marketing was thriving in ways that neither pure collaboration nor corporate hierarchy could have achieved alone. We'd created something new that honored our founding principles while adapting to contemporary challenges and opportunities. The crisis was truly over, but the lessons it had taught us about partnership, trust, and organizational culture would guide our decisions for years to come. 2 years after our partnership crisis, Morrison Chen Digital Marketing was facing its most exciting opportunity yet, and our most dangerous temptation. The call came on a crisp November morning from Victoria Chen, Senior Vice President of Corporate Development at TechForward Industries, one of the largest technology conglomerates on the West Coast. Victoria wasn't just another corporate executive making acquisition inquiries. She was my cousin, someone I'd grown up with during family gatherings in Seattle, and her approach was entirely different from the manipulative offers we'd received previously. "Luna, I've been following your company's growth for years," Victoria said during our initial phone conversation. "What you and Elijah have built is exactly the kind of innovative culture that TechForward wants to support and scale, not absorb." Her proposal was unlike anything we'd encountered. Instead of traditional acquisition, Tech Forward was offering strategic partnership that would provide capital investment, corporate client access, and operational resources while preserving our independence and collaborative culture. The partnership structure would involve Tech Forward purchasing a minority stake in Morrison Chen for $12 million, with additional performance-based investments available over 5 years. We would maintain complete operational control while gaining access to enterprise clients and advanced technology resources. Most intriguing, Tech Forward was positioning our collaborative approach as a competitive advantage they wanted to preserve and promote throughout their network. Our partnership model would become a case study for innovation in professional services, with potential licensing opportunities to other agencies. "We're not trying to fix your culture," Victoria explained during our follow-up meeting. "We want to learn from it and help you demonstrate that collaborative models can outperform traditional hierarchies at enterprise scale." The opportunity was extraordinary, but it came at a moment when our internal culture was more stable and successful than ever. Our hybrid organizational structure had eliminated most team tensions while preserving the collaborative values that made our work distinctive. The specialized leadership roles we'd created were functioning beautifully. Noah Martinez had become our recognized expert in technical strategy, leading complex implementations while mentoring newer developers. Rachel Torres had transformed client experience coordination into a sophisticated system that consistently exceeded satisfaction benchmarks. Even more significantly, our approach was attracting exactly the kind of clients who valued collaboration over corporate conformity. Cascade Outdoor Gear had expanded their relationship with us to include their parent company's entire retail network. Pacific Northwest Bank had recommended us to 3 other regional financial institutions. Our revenue had grown 40% over the past 18 months. But more importantly, our profit margins had improved because we were working with clients who appreciated our value rather than comparing us to commodity service providers. The team culture had evolved into something neither purely collaborative nor traditionally hierarchical. People understood their expertise areas and took leadership roles when appropriate, but major decisions still involved inclusive discussion and consensus building. During our monthly all-hands meetings, newer employees were contributing innovative ideas while respecting the collaborative principles that long-term staff had preserved. The generational divide that had threatened our culture was healing through shared success and mutual respect. Given this internal stability, the Tech Forward opportunity felt like external validation rather than corporate rescue. We were being approached because of our success, not despite our challenges. But Elijah's response to Victoria's proposal revealed that our partnership restoration, while legally complete, was still psychologically fragile. His immediate enthusiasm for the Tech Forward partnership triggered anxiety that I thought I'd overcome. "This is exactly what we've been building toward," Elijah said during our initial discussion about the opportunity. "A chance to scale our collaborative approach while accessing resources that could transform our impact and reach." His excitement was genuine and understandable, but it echoed the language he'd used when promoting previous organizational changes. The familiar pattern of external opportunities justifying internal transformations made me suspicious of his motivations. Was Elijah genuinely excited about preserving and scaling our collaborative culture? Or was he still searching for ways to implement the corporate growth strategies he'd never fully abandoned? To answer this question, I needed to understand his private thoughts rather than his public enthusiasm. The trust we'd rebuilt was strong enough for direct conversation, but some topics required careful navigation. During one of our regular partner dinners, a monthly tradition we'd established to maintain open communication, I raised my concerns about the Tech Forward opportunity and what it might mean for our partnership dynamics. "Elijah, I want to be honest about something that's been bothering me," I began as we shared appetizers at our favorite restaurant in the Pearl District. "Your excitement about this opportunity feels familiar in ways that make me nervous." He paused with his fork halfway to his mouth, clearly recognizing the parallel I was drawing to his previous enthusiasm for organizational changes that had nearly destroyed our partnership. "Luna, I understand why you'd be concerned," he replied, thoughtfully. "But this feels completely different to me. We're not being pressured to change our culture. We're being asked to preserve and demonstrate it." I appreciated his acknowledgement of my concerns, but I needed more specific assurance about his commitment to the collaborative principles we'd fought to maintain. "What specifically appeals to you about this opportunity?" I asked. "And how do you see it affecting the partnership dynamics we've worked so hard to rebuild?" Elijah's answer revealed growth in his understanding that I hadn't fully recognized. Over the past 2 years, he'd developed genuine appreciation for the collaborative culture that had initially frustrated his corporate ambitions. "The thing that excites me most is the possibility of proving that our approach can work at a larger scale," he explained. "Not changing it to fit corporate expectations, but demonstrating that collaborative management can outperform traditional hierarchies, even with enterprise clients." He described how our recent success with larger clients had changed his perspective about the relationship between organizational structure and business results. Instead of seeing collaboration as a limitation to overcome, he'd begun viewing it as a competitive advantage to leverage. "I spent years believing that we needed to become more corporate to succeed," Elijah continued. "But watching how our collaborative approach consistently delivers better results has convinced me that the market needs what we've built, not another traditional agency." His explanation addressed my concerns about his motivations while revealing something more important. Our partnership crisis had taught him lessons that were now influencing his strategic thinking in positive ways. But I still needed to understand how the tech-forward partnership would affect our internal decision-making, processes, and partnership dynamics. External opportunities had previously created pressure that damaged our collaboration. "How would you want to manage the tech-forward relationship to preserve what we've learned about partnership?" I asked. Elijah's response demonstrated remarkable insight into the patterns that had previously caused problems between us. He suggested that we establish explicit protocols for evaluating external opportunities, including mandatory cooling-off periods and independent legal counsel for both partners. "I don't want to repeat the mistakes I made before," he said directly. "External pressures and opportunities can be exciting, but they shouldn't override the partnership principles that make everything else possible." His self-awareness and commitment to process safeguards convinced me that he'd genuinely internalized the lessons from our previous crisis. The tech-forward opportunity could be evaluated on its merits without triggering the partnership dynamics that had nearly destroyed us. Over the following weeks, we conducted thorough due diligence on tech-forward's proposal, consulting with legal experts, financial advisors, and other business owners who'd navigated similar partnerships. The analysis confirmed Victoria's representations about tech-forward's intentions and track record. They had successfully partnered with several other professional services firms while preserving their distinctive cultures and operational independence. More importantly, tech-forward's client base included exactly the kind of technology companies and innovative enterprises that would value our collaborative approach. The partnership would provide access to prospects who were already committed to organizational innovation and cultural experimentation. But the most compelling aspect of the opportunity was its potential to demonstrate that collaborative models could succeed at enterprise scale. If we could prove this concept, other agencies might adopt similar approaches, creating positive change throughout the professional services industry. After 6 weeks of analysis and discussion, Elijah and I reached unanimous agreement to pursue the tech-forward partnership. But we structured our engagement to preserve the collaborative decision-making and partnership dynamics we'd worked so hard to rebuild. The legal agreement included explicit provisions protecting our operational independence and cultural autonomy. Tech-forward's investment would provide resources and opportunities, but all strategic decisions would remain under our joint control. We also established internal protocols for managing the partnership relationship. Monthly reviews would assess how the tech-forward collaboration was affecting our team culture and client relationships. Quarterly evaluations would determine whether the partnership was supporting or undermining our collaborative principles. Most importantly, we created an exit mechanism that would allow us to terminate the partnership if it began pressuring us toward organizational changes that compromised our values. TechForward would retain their financial investment, but we would regain complete independence. The partnership announcement generated significant attention within Portland's business community and the broader digital marketing industry. We were featured in several trade publications as an example of how professional services firms could scale while preserving innovative cultures. The coverage attracted interest from other agencies that were struggling with similar challenges about growth, culture, and organizational structure. We began receiving inquiries from firms that wanted to learn about our hybrid collaborative approach and partnership dynamics. This consulting opportunity became an unexpected revenue stream that demonstrated the broader market value of what we'd developed through our crisis and recovery. Our partnership model and collaborative culture were becoming intellectual property that other companies wanted to license and implement. 6 months after finalizing the TechForward partnership, Morrison Chen Digital Marketing was operating at a scale and sophistication that neither Elijah nor I had imagined possible, while maintaining the collaborative culture that made our work meaningful. Our team had grown to 52 employees across 3 offices in Portland, Seattle, and San Francisco. But instead of traditional corporate hierarchies, we'd replicated our hybrid structure with expertise-based leadership roles and collaborative decision-making processes. The enterprise clients we were serving through TechForward appreciated our collaborative approach and were consistently impressed by the innovative solutions it generated. Several had begun implementing similar principles within their own organizations. Most significantly, our partnership with Elijah had evolved into something stronger and more sustainable than our original relationship. We'd learned to address disagreements directly, evaluate opportunities cautiously, and preserve the collaborative principles that made our work distinctive. The crisis that had nearly destroyed us had ultimately taught us what was truly essential about our partnership and business culture. We discovered that the most important password wasn't technical access to computer systems. It was the trust and communication that genuine collaboration requires. During our 3rd anniversary celebration of signing the restored partnership agreement, I reflected on everything we'd learned through crisis, conflict, and recovery. The room was filled with employees who'd joined us at different stages of our journey, clients who'd become genuine partners in innovation, and the TechForward executives who'd helped us scale our collaborative approach. Elijah and I stood together, presenting awards to team members who'd contributed to our success while preserving the culture that made everything else possible. Noah Martinez received recognition for technical leadership that maintained collaborative innovation. Rachel Torres was honored for client experience coordination that exceeded enterprise expectations. But the most meaningful award went to Emma Rodriguez, who'd guided our cultural preservation through the most challenging period in our company's history. Her wisdom about maintaining collaborative principles while adapting to growth had been essential to our survival and success. As the celebration continued, Olivia Reeves approached me with observations that perfectly captured what we'd accomplished together. "Luna, I've watched your company grow from that tiny office above the bookstore to this amazing organization," she said, gesturing around the room filled with accomplished professionals and satisfied clients. "But what's most impressive is that you've maintained the collaborative spirit that made you special from the beginning." Olivia was right. We'd grown from 2 partners working in a garage to a 50-person agency serving enterprise clients, but the collaborative culture that had made our early work distinctive was stronger than ever. The password that Elijah had thought would cut me out forever, the technical access that had seemed so important during our crisis, had become a metaphor for the trust and communication that real partnerships require. We'd learned that the most important systems couldn't be controlled through administrative privileges or corporate hierarchies. They had to be built through consistent collaboration, mutual respect, and shared commitment to principles that made the work meaningful. Just Business has taught us both that the best business is built on relationships that transcend transactional exchanges. Our partnership had survived its greatest crisis by returning to the collaborative values that had made everything else possible. As I looked around the room that evening, I saw the legacy of our crisis and recovery. A team that valued both individual expertise and collaborative innovation. Clients who'd become partners in creating solutions that neither traditional agencies nor corporate hierarchies could have developed. A business model that was influencing other organizations to experiment with collaborative approaches. Most importantly, I saw a partnership that had been tested by the worst kind of betrayal and emerged stronger through honest confrontation, careful rebuilding, and sustained commitment to shared values. The company that had started in my garage 15 years earlier was now something neither Elijah nor I could have imagined alone. It was the product of genuine collaboration, not just between partners, but among everyone who'd contributed to its growth while preserving its essential character. 3 years after our crisis, Morrison Chen Digital Marketing wasn't just surviving or succeeding. It was thriving in ways that demonstrated the power of collaborative culture and partnership principles. We'd proven that businesses built on trust, respect, and shared values could compete successfully against corporate hierarchies and traditional management approaches. More importantly, we'd shown that crises could strengthen relationships when they were addressed with honesty, courage, and commitment to what really matters. The password that had once threatened to end everything had become the key to understanding what made our partnership valuable. Access to computer systems was temporary and replaceable. Access to trust, collaboration, and shared purpose was the foundation that made everything else possible. Elijah's attempt to cut me out of Just Business had taught us both that the most important business is never just business. It's always about the relationships and values that make success meaningful and sustainable. Looking back, I'm grateful for every difficult moment of our crisis. Without it, we never would have learned what our partnership was truly capable of becoming. The betrayal that nearly destroyed us had ultimately shown us how to build something stronger, more authentic, and more valuable than what we'd lost. Sometimes, the most devastating password breaches are the ones that teach us which systems really matter, and which ones can't be hacked, manipulated, or controlled by anyone who doesn't share the values that make them worth protecting. The Portland Business Journal interview request arrived on a Tuesday morning in September, exactly 5 years after our partnership crisis had reached its breaking point. Rebecca Kim, the technology reporter who'd covered Portland's startup scene for over a decade, wanted to feature Morrison Chen Digital Marketing in a special issue about resilient business partnerships. "Your story has become legendary in local business circles," Rebecca explained during our preliminary call. "People want to understand how a partnership that nearly imploded became stronger and more successful than ever." The interview was scheduled for the following week at our flagship Portland office, which had expanded to occupy an entire floor of a renovated warehouse in the Pearl District. The space embodied everything we'd learned about balancing collaboration with growth: open work areas that encouraged interaction alongside private spaces for focused creativity. As I prepared for the interview, I realized how much had changed since those desperate days when I'd felt systematically excluded from my own company. The woman who would be speaking to Rebecca Kim bore little resemblance to the paranoid partner who'd once spent sleepless nights documenting Elijah's every move. The transformation wasn't just personal, it extended throughout every aspect of our organization. The collaborative culture we'd fought to preserve had evolved into something more sophisticated and effective than our original partnership had ever achieved. Our hybrid leadership structure had become a model that other professional services firms were actively studying and implementing. The expertise-based authority we'd developed allowed for clear accountability while maintaining collaborative decision-making for strategic issues. Noah Martinez had become our Chief Technology Officer, a role that emerged naturally from his technical leadership rather than corporate mandate. His position carried real authority and responsibility, but it operated within collaborative frameworks that preserved team input on major decisions. Rachel Torres had transformed client experience coordination into a comprehensive system that consistently ranked among the top performance metrics in industry benchmarks. Her innovations in customer relationship management had become intellectual property that we licensed to other agencies through our consulting division. The consulting business itself had grown into a significant revenue stream that generated over $2 million annually by helping other companies implement collaborative management approaches. We'd developed proprietary methodologies, training programs, and assessment tools that were in demand throughout the professional services sector. But the most remarkable transformation was in our client relationships. The enterprise accounts we served through the Tech Forward partnership had evolved into true strategic collaborations that went far beyond traditional vendor relationships. Microsoft's Pacific Northwest division had engaged us to redesign their internal communication strategies using collaborative principles we'd developed. Their implementation had been so successful that other Microsoft divisions were requesting similar transformations. Amazon's advertising technology team had partnered with us on developing new approaches to creative campaign development that incorporated collaborative methodologies throughout their vendor network. The results had exceeded their performance targets by over 60%. Even more significantly, several of our enterprise clients had begun implementing collaborative management structures within their own organizations. We weren't just providing marketing services, we were influencing organizational culture throughout the technology industry. The success attracted attention from academic researchers who were studying collaborative management as an alternative to traditional corporate hierarchies. Professor Sarah Williams from Portland State University's Business School had been documenting our approaches for a comprehensive study about partnership dynamics in professional services. What you've achieved challenges fundamental assumptions about organizational efficiency and growth scalability, Professor Williams had told us during her research interviews. Your model suggests that collaborative approaches can outperform hierarchical management even at enterprise scale. Her preliminary findings indicated that our collaborative culture generated higher employee satisfaction, better client retention, and more innovative solutions than comparable agencies with traditional structures. The data supported what we'd experienced internally. Collaboration wasn't just more humane, it was more effective. This academic validation had led to speaking opportunities at business conferences and management symposiums throughout the country. Elijah and I had presented our partnership story and collaborative methodologies to audiences of CEOs, venture capitalists, and organizational development consultants. The speaking engagements revealed how unusual our approach remained within mainstream business culture. Most executives were curious about collaborative management, but skeptical about its practical implementation in competitive markets. How do you maintain efficiency when every decision requires consensus? Was the most frequent question from conference audiences. The assumption underlying the question, that collaboration inevitably created delays, reflected deep-seated beliefs about the relationship between authority and effectiveness. Our response had evolved into a comprehensive explanation of how collaborative decision-making actually accelerated implementation by ensuring that everyone understood and supported strategic directions. Traditional hierarchical decisions often faced resistance during execution that collaborative approaches eliminated through inclusive planning. The conference presentations had generated consulting inquiries from companies across various industries: technology firms, financial services, manufacturing, healthcare, and professional services. The demand for collaborative management expertise had grown beyond our capacity to serve directly. This market opportunity led to our most ambitious expansion yet, the Morrison Chen Institute for Collaborative Management. The institute would provide training, certification, and ongoing support for organizations implementing collaborative approaches to leadership and partnership development. The Institute represented everything we'd learned about scaling culture without compromising values. Instead of trying to grow our agency into a massive corporate entity, we were creating a separate organization that could disseminate collaborative principles while preserving the intimate culture that made our core business successful. Elijah had initially proposed that we expand Morrison Chen Digital Marketing into a national agency network with offices in major cities across the country. But our experience with the Tech Forward partnership had taught us that rapid expansion could dilute the collaborative culture that made our work distinctive. The Institute model allowed us to share our methodologies broadly while maintaining the manageable scale that supported authentic collaboration within our core team. Organizations could learn our approaches without us having to manage large-scale operations that might compromise our values. The development of the Institute had become Elijah's primary focus over the past 18 months. His passion for the project demonstrated how completely his perspective on business growth had evolved since our partnership crisis. "I used to believe that bigger was always better," he'd reflected during one of our planning sessions. "Now I understand that better is often smaller, more focused, and more authentic to core values." His leadership of the Institute development had been collaborative from inception, involving team input on curriculum design, delivery methods, and organizational structure. The contrast with his previous unilateral decision-making was remarkable and encouraging. The Institute's first cohort of students included executives from 15 companies across 8 industries. The 3-month program combined theoretical education about collaborative management with practical implementation support for specific organizational challenges. Early results were promising. Participating companies reported improved employee engagement, faster project completion times, and higher client satisfaction scores after implementing collaborative approaches. The quantitative data supported our experience that collaboration enhanced rather than hindered business performance. But the most meaningful validation came from individual testimonials about how collaborative management had transformed workplace, culture, and professional relationships. People described feeling more valued, more engaged, and more creative when their input was genuinely incorporated into decision-making processes. One particularly moving testimonial came from Jennifer Walsh, who had left Pacific Northwest Bank to become CEO of a smaller regional credit union. She'd implemented collaborative management throughout her new organization based on what she'd observed during our partnership recovery. Watching Luna and Elijah rebuild their partnership taught me that business relationships don't have to be adversarial, Jennifer had written in her program evaluation. Collaborative approaches create stronger organizations because they tap into everyone's best contributions, rather than limiting authority to a few individuals. Her credit union had achieved record growth and member satisfaction since implementing collaborative management principles. The success had attracted attention from other financial institutions that were interested in similar transformations. Stories like Jennifer's were multiplying throughout our institute network. The collaborative approaches we'd developed through crisis and recovery were helping other organizations build stronger, more resilient cultures that performed better in competitive markets. The impact extended beyond business results to personal relationships and professional satisfaction. People who'd implemented collaborative principles reported feeling more fulfilled in their work and more connected to their colleagues and organizational missions. As I reflected on this broader influence during my preparation for the Portland Business Journal interview, I realized that our partnership crisis had generated benefits far beyond our own relationship and company. The password that Elijah had tried to use to cut me out of my own business had ultimately become the key to insights that were helping organizations throughout multiple industries build more effective and humane workplace cultures. The techniques I'd developed for protecting my position during our conflict, comprehensive documentation, strategic planning, and systemic thinking, had evolved into methodologies that other leaders were using to navigate organizational challenges constructively. Even the pain and betrayal we'd experienced had become valuable teaching material. Business school case studies and management consulting frameworks now incorporated our story as an example of how partnerships could recover from serious trust violations through honest communication and shared commitment to values. The personal growth that both Elijah and I had experienced through our crisis had made us better partners, leaders, and human beings. The skills we'd developed for managing conflict, rebuilding trust, and maintaining collaborative relationships were serving us in all aspects of our lives. My marriage to Karen had strengthened as I'd learned to address disagreements directly rather than avoiding difficult conversations. The communication patterns I'd developed for partnership restoration had improved our family relationships and parenting approaches. Elijah had reported similar improvements in his personal relationships. The self-awareness he'd gained about his tendency toward unilateral decision-making had helped him become a better husband and father. His family had noticed and appreciated the changes in his approach to conflict resolution and collaborative planning. These personal transformations had deepened our partnership beyond business collaboration into genuine mutual respect and friendship. We'd learned that the strongest professional relationships were built on authentic personal connections rather than just shared economic interests. The depth of our renewed partnership was tested and validated when Elijah faced a serious health scare 18 months after our institute launch. A heart attack at age 42 had required emergency surgery and extended recovery time away from active business management. During his 3-month medical leave, I had managed all aspects of our operations while maintaining collaborative decision-making. Through video conferences and detailed consultation, the experience proved that our partnership had evolved into something resilient enough to survive the temporary absence of either partner. More importantly, Elijah's health crisis had prompted both of us to think seriously about succession planning and long-term business sustainability. We'd developed comprehensive plans for transitioning leadership to our senior team members if either partner became unable to continue active management. The succession planning process had revealed how successfully we'd developed collaborative leadership throughout our organization. Noah Martinez, Rachel Torres, Emma Rodriguez, and several other team members were fully capable of maintaining our culture and continuing our growth trajectory. This organizational resilience was perhaps the strongest evidence that our collaborative approach had created something more sustainable than traditional partnership structures. Instead of depending entirely on the founding partners, we'd built systems and cultures that could persist and evolve with different leadership. As the interview date approached, I found myself looking forward to sharing our story with Rebecca Kim and the Portland Business Journal readership. The narrative had evolved from corporate betrayal and recovery into something more comprehensive, a demonstration that business relationships could embody values like trust, respect, and mutual support, while achieving outstanding competitive results. The woman who would be interviewed bore little resemblance to the paranoid partner who'd once spent sleepless nights protecting herself from systematic exclusion. That frightened person had been transformed through the crisis into someone who understood that the most important business assets were relationships built on authentic collaboration rather than legal contracts or administrative control. The password that had once seemed so crucial, the technical access that could lock someone out of their own creation, had revealed itself as merely symbolic of deeper issues about trust, communication, and shared values that determine whether partnerships thrive or merely survive. Our story had become proof that even the most serious betrayals could become foundations for building something stronger and more valuable than what had been lost. The crisis that nearly destroyed us had ultimately taught us how to create relationships and organizations that were more resilient, effective, and meaningful than anything we'd imagined possible. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.